We have a wonderful speaker for you here today. We have a fantastic, large National Marine Sanctuary, the largest in the continental United States. And people always ask me, God, do you know of anything I can do to help the sanctuary, to help out with ocean efforts? Well, right now, we've got somebody that can tell you all about it and how you can make a difference. Lisa Emanuelson is a wonderful person. She is very, very sharp when it comes to the ocean, and she is currently the volunteer monitoring coordinator, and she's going to tell you all about what you can do to make a difference, and probably more than that, okay? Please, a warm Whalefest welcome for Lisa Emanuelson.
Well, as Steve said, my name is Lisa Emanuelson, and I work with the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. And we're going to talk a little bit about getting your feet wet in the sanctuary, and in specific on different programs that you can get involved in that involve you as a citizen scientist. But just to start off a little bit with some background on national marine sanctuaries, what is a national marine sanctuary? Lots of folks don't know. They don't know we exist, but we're actually areas of watery environments, both freshwater and saltwater, around the U.S., the continental U.S., as Steve mentioned, but also out in some of the U.S. territories in the Pacific Ocean as well. They are areas of our marine environment and freshwater, as I mentioned, with special conservation, recreational, educational, ecological, historical, cultural, archeological, and aesthetic qualities. And that's all taken from our National Marine Sanctuaries Act, which was actually passed in 1972. An amazing, amazing number of areas that we have in the ocean are protected based upon some of their archeological finds that we've had over the years. Our very first National Marine Sanctuary was actually the USS Monitor, which is a Civil War era ironclad ship. It's, for anybody that's a maritime history buff, that's, you know, the Holy Grail practically. It was an amazing ship. And that was our very first National Marine Sanctuary out in North Carolina area. So maybe my cursor will work. Oh, there it is. So out here, this is the USS Monitor. And that was our very first National Marine Sanctuary. But we're way over on the other coast here in California, and we actually are really fortunate because we have 4 National Marine Sanctuaries in California, and there's a huge amount of offshore area that's protected under National Marine Sanctuaries. But I'm only going to talk about our local one, which is Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. And you can see here we are in Monterey, right here, and our sanctuary actually starts far north of us in Marin County and goes all the way down to Cambria down south. So it's a huge, huge area. It's about 276 statute miles long. There's a very large biological diversity in this area, which is one of the reasons why folks wanted to protect it. For those of you that have been living in the Central Coast area for a number of decades, you may have remembered that in the 80s there was a big push for some more offshore oil drilling to happen here in the Central Coast. Yeah, I see some heads nodding. And people were really upset about it. They didn't want that to happen, and they got together in a huge grassroots effort up and down the Central Coast, and they put their heads together and tried to figure out how we could prevent offshore oil drilling. And becoming a National Marine Sanctuary was seen as the best way to prevent that. And so we now have the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, which is fantastic. It was a very large, as I mentioned, grassroots efforts, but a lot of agencies came together and a lot of different organizations came together to make it happen. But one of the things that was really special about our area is that we have just an incredible ecological diversity of animals that are residents here, and then also animals that are transients. They come through our area, or they maybe are here just for a very small, short period of time. So a lot of us, you know, we're here for Whalefest. There's lots of marine mammals that use our Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. We also have a lot of fish species that we find here in the Monterey Bay Sanctuary. 200 fish species are actually commercially viable fish species. Lots of birds that come here specifically to feed on the incredible bounty that we have within the sanctuary. And we actually even have 4 species of sea turtles. We don't see them too often, but we actually have the largest of all the sea turtles, which is the leatherback sea turtle. Lots of invertebrate phyla, and of course lots of algae. There's an amazing area offshore of us as well that was added to the National Marine Sanctuary. This is the Davidson Seamount, which is just offshore here from Cambria and the San Luis Obispo area. And that is actually an extinct undersea volcano that is about a 7,000-foot mountain from the seafloor, but you have to get through about 3,000 or 4,000 feet of seawater to actually get to the top of the seamount, and it's an amazing place. We've done a number of different research cruises there, and they've been able to age some of the corals that are living there. There's deep sea corals there, and they're aged at around 200 years old. So it's amazing when you think about these deep sea environments that are out there and what's actually there and how old they are. But I'm not going to talk so much about what's there, although I encourage you to look at our website, which is montereybay.noaa.gov. But I'm going to talk about how you can get involved, because a lot of the reason why the Monterey Bay Sanctuary is existing now is because of all of your efforts. And there's great ways to get involved in the science that goes into protecting the sanctuary further. So what is citizen science? Citizen science involves data that a lot of volunteers will be out there collecting in various forms, and I'll talk about those. It takes an amazing crew of volunteers, of which I hope you guys will consider becoming. And then we also have some amazing scientists that work in our midst that also contribute to helping the programs have robust data collection, and then also help us to determine what programs are actually going to be useful for future science collecting efforts. So there's a number of different citizen science programs out there. Some of you may have heard of the eBird program, the Cornell Ornithology Lab. They have an amazing citizen science bird watching program. The GLOBE program, which collects a lot of environmental data around the world and enlists students and also citizen science adults just like you guys. Adopt a Stream is another one, and then of course another local group is the Surfrider Blue Water Task Force. They do a lot of bacterial collection at our local surfing beaches. But those are things that are great because they involve folks just like you that maybe have scientific background or don't have scientific background. I don't like to turn anybody away. You don't have to have a PhD in phycology in order to be able to volunteer with us. I actually prefer if you don't, because you tend to be a better data collector if you don't have any science background. But these are the programs I'm going to talk about today. We have our Beachcomber program. We also have a number of water quality programs, First Flush, Snapshot Day, Urban Watch, and then we have some outreach programs as well, some which collect data and some which don't. So we have TM Ocean, Baynet, Limpets is our long-term monitoring in intertidal and sandy beach areas, and then we also have a burgeoning plankton monitoring program, and then there's also an app that you can help be a part of citizen science data collecting through the Whale Alert. So I'll talk about beachcombers first. This is our coastal beach walking program where volunteers will walk beaches looking for dead stuff, which might sound like not the thing you want to do, but it's actually really fascinating, and we can learn a lot about what's happening in the ocean by looking at what's dead on the beach. So if we have a lot of otters that have been killed from various reasons, shark bites, microsystem poisoning, then we know we can find out that from collecting the carcasses and measuring the carcasses. And then also we've, in the early 90s, there was a problem with offshore gill netting that was happening in the Monterey area. And a lot of open ocean birds were actually washing ashore, and we could detect that because we had a lot of dead birds that normally feed offshore, and they were coming in and ending up on the beaches, and so we could work harder on trying to figure out the sources and also move that gill netting effort offshore. So we have beach cast birds and marine mammals. Each month about 100 miles of beach are walked by pairs of volunteers that are assigned to a specific beach. We have about 110 active volunteers. This is primarily in the Central Coast region, but our beach comber program actually goes down into Southern California as well, where there's another National Marine Sanctuary in Santa Barbara. But it's an amazing program, and it's a lot of fun. So folks, as I said, they're assigned to walk their beaches. They'll look for dead birds. They'll identify the birds. They'll do what we call toe clips to show how long birds or other mammals might be on the beach during the number of months that it takes them to fully decompose. So it's a lot of fun. You get to see a lot of really cool stuff that you wouldn't normally see, and you learn a lot about what our ocean holds. But then you also get a chance to just walk our beautiful beaches, which is really, they're so stunning. As I mentioned, the Beachcomber program is able to detect large-scale bird die-off events, which we call unusual mortality events. We also have seen some harmful algal bloom impacts from some of our birds. I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago we had a Akashiwo algal bloom that somehow rinsed the waterproofing off of the birds, and a lot of birds died of hypothermia, and that was from a harmful algal bloom that we had. We also detect any tarring that's happened. During these large winter storms that we've had recently, oftentimes we'll see tar balls, or we'll see animals that have tarring on their feathers or on their bodies, and that they'll end up dead on the beach sometimes. And we can actually take those carcasses and have the oil tested to see where it comes from. And an example of determining exactly a source of oil that we've seen is actually from the Luckenbach oil spill, which was the Jacob Luckenbach was a oil tanker that went, actually it foundered and sank just outside of the Golden Gate Bridge. And we were seeing birds with fresh oil on them. Each tanker has a very specific oil in it, and we can actually determine, based upon chemical signatures from tarred birds, we can determine what that source, where that oil is actually from. So we could figure out that it was from the Luckenbach, and then that sort of set into motion this large-scale recovery of the Luckenbach's oil tanker reserves that were still on the seafloor. So it was amazing for us to be able to determine that. But we track oil blobs, we track oiled birds, that kind of stuff. So. Our next program is First Flush, and this is our first major rainstorm of the winter season monitoring that we do. And so we have a team of volunteers that are here in Monterey. We have a sister organization up in Santa Cruz, which is the Coastal Watershed Council, and they have their team of volunteers. And then we have another sister group up in San Mateo County, the San Mateo County RCD, and they have groups of volunteers that go out during that first major rainstorm. They'll go out to assigned sites, and they'll take samples of that water that's going into the ocean. And this is the worst of the worst water, because all the contaminants that have been settling on our streets and in our neighborhoods, that will all get washed off and into the ocean. So if you remember when we had our first major rainstorm back in October, they always say don't go into the ocean for at least a week if you're a surfer after that first flush, and that's because there's so many pollutants that are getting washed off of the land, and bacteria, and that's not a healthy thing for a surfer to do, to go into that water. So this is our First Flush program. We have a number of sites here in the Monterey area. We monitor one large outfall in Seaside, 3 outfalls in Monterey, I think 9 outfalls in Pacific Grove, and another 3 in Carmel, and also a site up in Watsonville. That's our local folks. The other folks are up in Capitola, and they have about 8 sites up there, and then the folks in San Mateo County are measuring probably, I think, 11 sites in Half Moon Bay area. So we look at all kinds of analytes, copper, zinc, and lead. We look for bacteria, E. coli, and Enterococcus. We look at the nutrients, nitrate, phosphate, ammonia, and urea. We look at sediments because there's so many sediments that can be washed off of our streets, and those sometimes can collect other contaminants such as pesticides and metals with them. So we look at total suspended solids and turbidity. And then we also have added fluoride, potassium, color, and then hardness, which are just other indicators that let us look at whether water that we're seeing during dry times could possibly be from natural sources or also from leaking, say, CalAm water. So, and we compare our results during the first major rainstorm with dry weather results that we are taking or samples that we're taking so that we can see what the differences are. But we've been doing First Flush since 2000. And you can see here, these are our sites coupled with our partner sites up in San Mateo County and then also up in Capitola. This last year, we monitored 32 outfalls with 40 volunteers. Our local group here that we partner with is called the Mr. Swimp Group. It's a Monterey Regional Stormwater Management Program. And many people aren't necessarily aware, but for a city to have storm drain outfalls or storm drains that flow into the ocean, the cities actually have to have a permit that shows that they're trying to improve the water that's flowing through the storm drains out into the ocean. And this is part of what they do in order to show that there's been improvement. So as I mentioned, we've been doing this since 2000, and we did a multi-year analysis a couple years ago and actually showed that there's been some improvements in our water quality over the number of years that we've been monitoring. So that's actually really hopeful. So the Mr. Swimp Group is our local group. They're fantastic, very dedicated folks from our local cities. We do trainings with our volunteers so everybody has an opportunity to understand what we're doing. And then we also have a lot of samples that we collect for validation and QA, so we can check to make sure that the teams are collecting samples properly, but then also that the labs are actually analyzing our samples properly. The copper, bacteria, and phosphate that we see, those are the three analytes that we typically have the biggest issues with. So copper comes from brake pads. As you're braking with your car, there's a fine dust that's actually coming off of your brake pads and adhering either to the road surface or also to your tire rims. And when that rain happens and it starts to mobilize in the environment. Bacteria, of course, we have lots of issues with bacteria from pet waste as well as wildlife waste. We've worked with some of our local cities to try and improve, so identify and then also improve their storm drain infiltration from, say, the sanitary sewer. And our local cities are actually happy to say that they're pretty dedicated to try and improving any kind of situations where we see high bacteria. Phosphate is one of those tricky ones. You know, we see lots of phosphate in our sample water. It can be from a lot of different sources, including soaps, but also from fertilizers. And so we're not always certain where that comes from, but it is something that we see we see higher results in most areas. Our next program I will talk about is Snapshot Day, which is actually coming up on May 6th this year. But this is our one-day water quality event that we do for creeks and rivers that are flowing into the sanctuary. So First Flush was storm drains in urban areas mostly, and this program is actually focused on creeks and rivers. And it helps us to understand the watersheds that are actually flowing into the ocean and whether they're healthy or not. So we have 4 different areas that we're actually doing the program. It's sanctuary-wide, so it's all the way from Pacifica up north all the way down to San Luis Obispo down south. And it's on one single day where we have hundreds of volunteers that go out and take samples of creeks and river sites and do field measurements. And we do it all on the same day, which is an amazing effort if you've ever had to do anything like that scientifically, to get people out and sample 100+ sites on a single day. It's quite an undertaking. So it's something that we couldn't do without our volunteers because it just would be too costly to try and do it with professionals. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes the volunteers are a little bit more precise and in their sample collection. So this is Snapshot Day. Our local hub is at REI in Monterey, and we do a training on the weekend before. So we'll do a training on, I think it's April 28th, and then we'll have the event on, or actually probably April 29th, and then we'll have the event on May 6th. So these are all of our sites that we are sampling, creeks and river sites. We look for bacteria and nutrients. So the volunteers will take field measurements, but then they'll also collect samples for bacteria and nutrient analysis. The field measurements that we take are for basic things like pH, temperature, dissolved oxygen, conductivity. We have amazing partnerships with our folks up and down the coast that we do this program with. We've been doing it since 2000, sorry about that, since 2000, and we did a multi-year analysis to show sort of what the biggest issue areas were, and we were able to determine that obviously it kind of fits with what you would think, where the areas in the bottom of watersheds, especially where there's agricultural drainage, tend to be the most impacted. But you know, there's lots of areas that are getting improvements, especially out in the Castroville area where there's a lot of sloughs that are out there. So Snapshot Day, this last year we did 111 sites. We were monitoring in the 10 major watersheds that flow into the sanctuary. Last year we had 143 volunteers. We just recently came out with a 14-year report which outlines a lot of the improvements and water quality analysis that we've done over the years. And this year's event is going to be on May 6th in 2017. So amazing volunteers. You know, we get a lot of students from CSUMB that come to join us, and these are folks that are oftentimes just starting their career and trying to figure out what they want to do when they grow up, so to speak. And then we also have folks like our two gentlemen there in the bottom right that are retired guys, and they just never got a chance to do much science when they were in their working world, and they just love doing this kind of stuff. So we see all kinds of people, and it's always inspiring for me, definitely. So our next program is Urban Watch. This is a program that we do during the dry weather months here in Pacific Grove, and our sister organization, Coastal Watershed Council, does it up in Capitola as well. But we're looking at our storm drain outfalls, as a very small subset of them in Pacific Grove, and we're looking for common urban pollutants. So we're looking at detergents, ammonia, phosphate, and chlorine, as well as some just basic field parameters. So we go out to our sites and we collect our samples. We are also looking at trash at each one of our sites because, as many of you know, plastics are getting from our watersheds out into the ocean through our storm drain systems, and creating quite an issue out in the ocean for the sanctuary directly and its inhabitants. So we take our samples once a month at each one of our sites, and we field test them for detergents. The volunteers get a chance to do all kinds of stuff with us, so they get to sort of play mad scientist. Here's Craig on the bottom right, playing mad scientist. Everybody always has to wear gloves. Everybody always teases me when I have to make sure that they have their gloves on. But each of the volunteers is trained how to collect samples, and then also how to run the analysis as well. And then we also are measuring our trash. So we collect trash and sort it based upon the Save Our Shores trash card and weigh it every month. So detergents, ammonia, phosphate, chlorine, and then once a month we also take samples for bacteria. One of the things that we've been able to determine, especially with our bacteria results, is in some of our local cities, because the storm drain system and the sanitary sewer are so old, oftentimes there's exfiltration from the sanitary sewer and infiltration into the storm drain system, and so we'll end up with high bacteria in our storm drains. And so when we're out testing, that's ideally what we're trying to determine, is if there's any kind of infiltration that's happening. We've also been able to detect when backwashing's been happening in our local pools. We had an incident with both the Monterey and the Pacific Grove High School, that the pool's backwashing system was connected to the storm drain instead of to the sanitary sewer. So we were seeing very, very high chlorine levels in our storm drains, which should never happen. And so we were able to determine that and or detect that and work with the pools to get those systems fixed. The Urban Watch program also helps with any kind of illegal disposal. We've had issues where people have dumped paint into the storm drains, and we'll see that. Of course, that paint would eventually end up out in the ocean. And then we talked to lots and lots of people just through our being, out in the community, collecting our samples and processing them. So I'm always amazed at, people are really happy to hear that folks in Pacific Grove are so dedicated to protecting the ocean and keeping Pacific Grove streets clean. So we've been going since 1997 here in Pacific Grove, and also in Capitola. We have about 20 volunteers that kind of come in and out, and we do 7 sites, and we test those monthly during the dry weather months, so April through October. So here we are analyzing some of our samples, but you can see on the bottom left that there's one of our trash days, and just you can see how many cigarette butts we catch or we pick up. It's just phenomenal how many cigarette butts we pick up. So this was from Lovers Beach, actually, which is probably our most heavily used local beach in Pacific Grove. And they now have a trash butt can or a collection canister there, but we still find lots of cigarette butts. So I remind people to leave their butts. So T-Motion is another program that we conduct. This is a somewhat citizen science, but also interpretive program that we do in Cannery Row and off of Cannery Row and in Elkhorn Slough. And we have kayakers in sanctuary labeled boats, and they go out and they talk to other kayakers about approaching sensitive wildlife too closely. Our most sensitive wildlife are, of course, our sea otters and harbor seals. If people get too close, these animals have to get in the water or swim away and expend, needed energy in order to escape being disturbed or touched or anything like that. So we have volunteers that are out Memorial Day to Labor Day, and they talk to folks about the sanctuary, and they also talk to them about leaving the animals where they are and trying to instill in people the idea that you'll see more of their natural behavior if you don't chase them down. So, and they'll be healthier in the end. So, as I mentioned, we're off Cannery Row and also in Elkhorn Slough. I have an amazing group of about 50 volunteers. We're out on the water on the weekends mostly, and so we also are documenting any kind of disturbance that we see, the animals involved, and the severity of that disturbance. Most people that come to our area that are out on a boat, they don't understand what to look for when they're trying to see an otter, and so they don't understand the warning signs that the otter is giving them about how close people are approaching. So we're out there just as docents to try and help folks understand and help them learn a little bit more about what's happening. So, but again, it's just an amazing group of volunteers. So we have an 8-week training that we do for this program that starts in March. And so we have weekly lectures in the evenings, and then we have weekend field trips and kayak safety training as well. So this program has actually been used in other areas. There's a program just like this starting up down in Morro Bay, which is outside the sanctuary boundaries, but the people down there, because there's a growing otter population, so they are they're starting to see some of the impacts from disturbances, and so a local group down there asked to use our program as a model and have their own sea life stewards, that is what they're calling themselves, to prevent disturbances of the otters down there. We've had a number of people that have come and did different master's theses on us. We have an amazing amount of data on disturbances and also how many animals are disturbed and severity. Our locations are Elkhorn Slough and Cannery Row. In the time that we've been on the water, we have probably about 2,000 disturbances that we've noted, and we've been on the water since 2000. So it's not a ton, but at the same time, we're out there educating folks before they have an opportunity to disturb the animals. So we talk to about 8,000 people per year, and unfortunately our funding is always in jeopardy of being cut. And this is a program that is not conducted by any other organization other than the sanctuary, and it's so critical to protecting our animals. I mean, there's so much that you can do by telling people not to touch the animals, but when the rubber hits the road or the paddle hits the water, what we find is that people become just overwhelmed by the marine environment and just chase down those animals. So we need folks on the water to help stop that. So, and to educate people. So that's T-Motion. Next program I'll talk about is Baynet. This is if you've lived here for any amount of time and you've ever walked down the rec trail and you've seen the folks in blue jackets, they're at Hopkins and in other areas. We have a dedicated group of volunteers that have binoculars on tripods, and they just go ahead and they just talk to whoever's going by and point out wildlife that's there. It's an amazing program. everybody is just phenomenal, just a great group of people. So we are in many places along the sanctuary: Santa Cruz, Moss Landing, Monterey, PG, Pebble Beach, and we have some volunteers that actually go down to highway turnouts in Big Sur and just point out stuff to people down there. So seabirds that are at offshore rocks, or any kind of whales that are migrating. So it's a great group of people. Last year, they talked to almost 42,000 people in 1 year, which is an amazing number of people. And that's probably from, I'd say, about 20 folks. We have 50 people on the roster, but 20 people probably talk to 40,000 people, which is amazing. They dedicate over 2,000 hours to us. One of their primary focus times is coming up with the harbor seal pupping that's going to happen at Hopkins Beach coming up in the next month or two. You'll see some fencing that the City of Pacific Grove will put up, but the Bayonet volunteers are oftentimes there just trying to help folks understand what's happening with the harbor seals. So it's a great time. If you haven't been there and actually seen a birth of a harbor seal, it's just amazing. So I encourage you to go. So we also have programs that we do, long-term monitoring programs for students, which they're collecting data that we enter into an online database. So students can do either a sandy beach sand crab monitoring protocol, or they can also do a rocky intertidal. And this is a program that is throughout sanctuaries here on the West Coast, and it's just amazing to see students become really passionate about our coastal areas. It's just amazing. So some of our data has been used for what's called natural resource assessments after oil spills. So the Costco Busan oil spill that happened a few years ago, they looked for our data to try and determine what they should charge the oil company for damaging the resources. And so some of our data was actually used. We also have a marine biotoxin monitoring program, so it's a plankton monitoring program that we do in San Simeon, and it's going to start up pretty soon at the Monterey Wharf. But the idea is to detect those toxigenic species early, and it's done in coordination with the California Department of Public Health. And then our last citizen science thing, and somewhat appropriate here for Whale Alert, is our app that we are promoting, where folks that are on ships that are whale watching boats or on your own boat, you can log where you're seeing whales, and it actually is sort of a crowdsourcing idea for data so that we can see where the whales are usually, and try and adjust some of the shipping lanes that are just offshore if people are seeing whales in those areas. And we also like folks to tell us if there's dead or alive whales, because even a dead whale is actually good information for us. And there's multiple species on the app, which is fantastic. So it's a great way to act like a scientist and record your observations while you're out there on the water. So it's super helpful, super helpful. So it's Whale Alert. And if you have any questions or you want to get involved and contact me, or you're interested in something that you're interested in doing something but you didn't find what you were looking for here, you can always contact me and I can get you hooked up with some folks that might be doing something that you're interested in. But we're always looking for volunteers, and as I mentioned, our Team Ocean and coordinated with Bayonet, our training is coming up in March. So our 8-week training will be happening soon, and so I'm always looking for volunteers to join with that. So if anybody has any questions.
Any questions?
No? Good.
I have one.
Okay.
You mentioned that you don't have to have an advanced degree in biology or psychology or whatever. So with a general understanding of grade school math and stuff, anybody can, with the proper training, become a volunteer. Are there any programs that don't even necessitate training? You may have talked about them, but can you single out those? Or is everything, is there a training program involved with all volunteer work because it's necessary?
Well, the Whale Alert program, because it's an app that doesn't require any prior training, so that's good. But certainly with the other programs where we're collecting data, there is always a training involved because we want to make sure that the data that we collect is actually viable and useful. And so I need you to follow certain protocols. Like with our water quality programs, everybody needs to be trained in order to participate, definitely. And that's just all for data quality, you know, so we want to make sure, yeah.
Snapshot day one time to actually shoot some footage, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
REI.
Yeah.
Are you still enjoying those huge crowds? Because there were 200 people there.
I don't know if there's 200 people, but we still get large crowds. Like I said, for Snapshot Day, we have over, well, you know, at REI, we oftentimes have a crowd of about 100 people that are all joining that day. And the great thing about something like Snapshot Day is that it's a one-day water quality event. So there's training for part of one day, and then there's the actual event, which is part of one day. And it's a great way to participate and also join the effort, but contribute quality data to a long-term data set, which is really unusual in the water quality world and probably in lots of other data collection fields as well. But we do get close to 100 folks that join us on that day, and they'll be at REI for they'll be at REI for maybe half an hour or an hour, and then after we get our nice big group shot, then we all head out to our sites, and everybody is assigned a certain number of sites, and they'll go and do their field measurements and sample collection, and then they all come back to REI, and it's amazing to hear the stories and, you know, oh, we saw this, and you know, it's really phenomenal. We have teams of folks that go down to Big Sur, and they just always have the best stories about the beautiful scenery and that kind of stuff. But even in our other areas where we're going out to some of the sloughs to collect our data, those are amazing areas. And part of the beauty with Snapshot Day is that it's a great way for folks to understand and appreciate our local watersheds. And some of the natural areas we have around here, which folks might not get a chance to see otherwise because they wouldn't be assigned to go to Templadero Slough. So, but it's a great way to get involved. And yeah, we still have lots and lots of folks, so I'm always happy that we get a lot of people. So, yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you.